Um, there we go. Because if I don't have the slide, I completely forget till it's like halfway through. So we're recording and I have a blank slide there. I just wanted to share with the group that Eaton Great Start has partnered with Bright by Text, which is a texting service that sends you information that is geared towards the age of your child for families with kids 5 and under. So it's all developmental information, includes activities, games, resources. You get a couple texts a week. And you can also get information about local events and activities and resources in Eaton County. So for anybody who's interested, you just text EC Kids to 274-448. And it's kind of fun. I signed up with a couple of fake kids since my kiddo's older than 5. And it's been really amazing. It's just cool. You get these great little tidbits of information about things like social and emotional development or language development. And the text themselves is really contained, but then there's usually a link to go if you want to look more in depth about that topic. So I've really been enjoying it. It's pretty cool. And I'm going to hand it over to Erica. Erica, I'll let you introduce yourself and get going, and I'm going to stop sharing here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marnie. So yes, my name is Erica Guthaus. I am a mom, first and foremost, always. I have 4 kiddos who now range in age from 9 to 15. So I've been in the trenches for a while. And then I am also a doula. And right now I am also the director of a program in Kalamazoo called Red Birth Green, which is a division of Rooted. So all of my work is based in birth and babies and parenting, and I love it. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you guys tonight and talk about actually one of my most favorite topics, which is postpartum planning, because everyone gets really excited about just having a baby and the stuff, and everyone kind of forgets about what comes immediately after. And so I first came into the professional birth world in 2014, but I've been supporting families since 2008 in various capacities. And it's kind of a universal truth that it's this overlooked thing, but moving into that space with intention and with thought can have profound impact on how that transition goes. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And I'm going to share my screen, which is always a lovely, awkward thing too. The in-between, right? Here we go. Excellent. Okay, so tonight we're talking about let's have this baby, preparing to thrive in your postpartum period. I actually have just a few slides, and then I want to have kind of a conversation because I think it's really important that you have the opportunity to like talk and ask questions and ask for recommendations and all of those types of things as well. So I'm big on the 5 protective factors. I figured Marnie might be too, because I do partner work with Great Start Collaborative in Kalamazoo County through my day work. And one of the things that we've been leaning into a lot lately is parental resilience, because hello, it's still a pandemic and it's been a really, really long, 15, 16 months at this point. Parents are tired, and pregnant parents are like my heart and soul all the time, but like especially right now, because being pregnant during such an uncertain time period where there are so many factors and variables and uncertainties and all of those things is like a whole different level of resilience is required for that. So we're going to kind of base this on parental resilience tonight. And making positivity a habit, because that can also have profound impact, not just on the postpartum period, but also on your baby in utero, which is really cool. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I like to practice remembering that my glass is always half full, because positivity is the sister to resilience. So that can look like a couple of different things. One, it can be practicing gratitude, because even when things stink, we can still find small things to be grateful for, and that can help to shift the perspective on the situation. So even when you have not slept well for many, many nights in a row, maybe your baby smiles for the first time, and you can practice gratitude by recognizing that moment and really letting it sink into your memories and shifting gears. So, There we go. All right. So resilience by definition is the power or ability of a material or a person to return to its original form or position after it's been compressed or stretched. It can also mean elasticity. And then the secondary definition is the ability of a person to adjust to or recover readily from illness, adversity, major life changes, which is what we're talking about tonight. For example, buoyancy. So it's kind of like, if you have an empty container and you push it down underwater, right, it pops back to the surface. That's kind of what resilience looks like when you think about it in human form. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I hate this and I would much rather talk. So one of the things that I'm going to share with Marnie, so if you're watching this after the fact, feel encouraged to reach out and get a copy of what I'm going to make sure that she has. But so I like to utilize a tool called a postpartum planning worksheet. And it walks through a spectrum of things that seem like, I don't want to say common sense, but things that just are really normal, right? But we don't take the time to think about them. And so one of those options, let me get back here for 1 second so that I have my notes in front of me. So we talk a lot about it taking a village to raise a child, right? But the thing is that the way that our society is structured at this moment in time, we live in a very individualized way. And so those villages per se are not as accessible as they used to be, which is a bummer, especially when you've just had a baby. And especially true, even more so when you've just had a baby in a pandemic, because you don't have access to a lot of the things that you might normally. Things like play groups in person or being able to get out to the library. It might feel extra cumbersome to go to a park play date or something like that. You might not even feel comfortable having other people come into your home because you're worried about your baby's safety. And also pregnant bodies are considered part of the vulnerable populations that can be extra impacted by COVID, right? So there's just a lot of things that are very different than they ever have been before. And it's something that a lot of people still are having difficulties navigating. So I first and foremost want to say that if it feels hard and overwhelming, that's okay, because it is. Like, it is hard and overwhelming right now. It's always that case, but there's a whole extra layer that we're having to navigate right now. And so finding your village of support is like vital to that existence. Now, the cool thing is that we also have opportunities like we're doing right now via Zoom to connect to a village that we might not have otherwise, and be able to utilize different, online tools. So your village can be in person, or it could be virtual, or it could be a text group. And that is an excellent option as well. There are tons of parenting groups on via Facebook. Not all of them are great, let's be honest, but they are an option for connection. Parent Coalition is a great spot. Having a parent liaison like Marnie to connect to and say, hey, I don't know where to go. Can you help? Reach out. That's a great resource to take advantage of. There are also options in the community always, like doulas, like myself, who are very knowledgeable about where to find and get access to the things you need. Sometimes, connecting to different layers of help can be beneficial. A lot of times it needs to be more than just your immediate family or friends. So don't be afraid to cast your web far. And it doesn't always have to have a dollar amount attached to it as well. A lot of people are willing to trade and are also willing to create situations where maybe there's another mom who's in your same circumstance and you guys can partner up and create like your little COVID bubble. And then you guys can flip flop back and forth. And so that can be really helpful. Just knowing that there's somebody else that you can rely on that's not in your immediate circle. This is also very, very important for single parents, which I don't think gets talked about enough. A lot of the resources that are available are talking about 2-parent households, and like how to navigate that postpartum period is like automatically assuming that there's going to be 2 adults in the home to help support that. And that's not always the case either. And so if you're a single parent, I think it's really important that you start thinking with intention about who is my village, who can I call in when I start to feel overwhelmed and I need a little bit more support than what I can manage on my own. Dana, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. Just unmute yourself. So when you think about bringing in that village, there's some, and you're trying to think of people, there are some specific areas that I like to focus on. So one is asking yourself the question is who can help get us or get me the rest that I need to fully recover from the birth experience? I think that a lot of people forget that like it's a whole thing, right? You don't just like have a baby and go home. There's a lot of work. It's a labor process that gets the baby out. It's exhausting physically, mentally, and emotionally. And you usually come home feeling pretty depleted and like you really can't move another step. And yet then like the immediate support of nursing staff and lactation consultants that you just had at your beck and call are not there anymore either. And so the first thing is rest. Also, if you're not getting adequate rest, there are a few things that can happen. One, it's impactful to our immune systems. So you become even more susceptible to, germs, viruses, all of that type of thing. It also is really impactful to our emotions and being able to keep track of which way is up. So by nature of having a newborn, you're going to be sleep deprived and that's okay. But you also have to compensate for that. So starting to think about rest on a 24-hour spectrum versus in a group together of, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, it might not happen that way. But you still need to be getting, your optimal sleep number, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, who knows? Everybody needs something a little bit different in a 24-hour period. Does it stink that it comes in groups? So usually you have like 2 to 3 hours. Yep, absolutely. Does it feel the same as a full restorative night's sleep? Nope, it never will. But you still have to get it collectively. Otherwise, you're going to quickly bottom out. It can start to, everything that was already hard is going to feel even harder. And so being able to find ways to rest in different ways is important.
Erica, I just wanted to jump in and say, thank you for bringing this one up first, because I think that a lot of us come home from the hospital and oftentimes there is help being offered. And we think that we should be able to just do it by ourselves, especially when it comes to that sleep thing. And I was like that. And I came home and my in-laws were here and we sent them away after a day or two. And then a week later, I was a blubbering mess and begging my husband to call my mother-in-law and ask her to come back. And she came and stayed with us for 2 weeks. And literally all she did was just hold my kid when I needed to sleep, because he was really colicky and gassy and all the things and just couldn't. You could not lay him down. And that changed everything. That having those 2 weeks to be able to recover my body from what happened absolutely changed my relationship with that child forever. I mean,
it's really easy too to kind of lose sight of the fact that like you are holding a miracle, right? Mm-hmm. Like our bodies are freaking amazing and miraculous and we grow humans, right? But you can lose sight of how awesome that is because you're just so very tired. Mm-hmm. And everything else, your hydration can be on point, your nutrition can be on point, breastfeeding, if you're choosing to do that, can be going really well. And if you're so bone deep tired, you lose sight of all of it. And it really is impactful in the long term because it'll stick around and you can become resentful of that child and it does affect bonding, all of it. It is a multi-pronged situation. And so it's where I like to start the conversation always, because it's very impactful to have somebody, even if it's like one day a week for a couple hours, come in and say, you know what, your house can be a mess. I don't care. I can sit and hold your baby so that you can lay down, so you can take a shower, whatever. Like we don't have to go anywhere. You don't even have to talk to me when I walk through the door. You can literally hand me your kid and go do what you need to do. Like, so it can be very small, right? It can be full on, like Marty just shared, like that can be really beneficial too, depending on the situation. But the most important part is that you take the time to think about it and plan for the fact that you're going to need some extra support to get adequate rest in order to do your job, which is bond to your baby and love your baby and keep things moving forward. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Like, cause it's just vital. It's vital to the whole process. So, I just mentioned nutrition, right, being on point. So the next thing on my list on the postpartum planning worksheet is who can.
This is Dana. Could I ask a quick question or make a comment, I guess? So I am fortunate. I have a two-parent household. This is my first baby. My husband we have a 4-year-old daughter. She's my stepdaughter. And so we share 50-50, we have 50-50 custody, with her biological mother. And so one of the things I'm of course concerned about is actually the very first topic that you talked about is being sleep deprived, and we will have each other, but I'm also worried about him being sleep deprived. And I know from, everything I've read that with the breastfeeding, because I'm planning on breastfeeding, that I'll be primarily responsible. But he's sitting right next to me. He wanted to watch this with me, and so he's definitely involved and interested. And I know he'll contribute as much as possible. But what have you seen or what have you experienced in the situations where you have both mom and dad present? So it's not a single parent household, but things start getting challenging when between the two of the parents, or both people getting enough sleep, or it just hit me, Erica, when you said make sure you have a plan, because it will happen and you'll be exhausted, and I don't have a plan other than relying on him, really.
Yes, but you're here tonight, so that's fantastic. Like that's step one in creating a plan. So I love that, Dina. And I love that you guys are listening together, because I think that's also like having a team approach to it when that's an option is really, really beneficial. Also having this conversation before the baby is here is so significant, because you cannot have a logical conversation once the baby's here. It's not possible. Like I've been working with families for a really long time. Everyone's like, oh no, it will be fine. I'm telling you from experience and my professional lens and personal experience, it won't be fine. It just won't be. And so you've got to like give it some thought. So there's a couple of there's some nuance to every situation, right? So one is, what does work situation and time off surrounding baby look like for you guys? So that's first and foremost. Obviously that looks different for every family. I think what can work well is if you have a parent that goes back to work sooner and then you have one that's off longer, is if you work out some type of like rotational sleeping schedule. So like I'm actually working with a family right now, and dad had to go back to work like, oh man, like a little over a week after baby was born. So like fresh newborn, very little sleep happening. He has a very intense job. And so his sleep is actually vital to the success of him being able to do his job, right? So what they do is they do rotational sleeping. So they have a guest room that they utilize. They're not even in the same space as baby. Mom goes and lays down. They have a 2-year-old also, right? So a little bit younger than your situation, but it can work. So mom gets their 2-year-old to bed, and she goes to the guest room and she sleeps the first shift from like 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. and dad stays up with baby. And even with breastfeeding, this can work. You can express some milk, or you can feed baby right before you lay down. Or even if that neither of those things work, if baby's like, no, I don't want a bottle, I just want it straight from the tap, because that happens too. Dad can always bring the baby in, and you can kind of wake up just enough to feed and then hand baby back off and go back to sleep, right? But it's just knowing that you actually can fully shut off your brain for a moment and try and get some restorative rest. Then when that shift ends, then you guys flip flop and dad goes and sleeps in the guest room. Unfortunately, dad does actually get real sleep because he doesn't have to wake up and feed a baby and that type of thing. But I think just having that ability to completely shut your brain off, even if it's for 2 solid hours, that can make a world of a difference. Does that make sense, Dana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And that actually, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your
No, you're
your
absolutely
process that you're presenting, but it does bring me to another question about breastfeeding and then bottle feeding, and kind of how to make that transition, or when, like, is there a certain time, or do you just kind of right off the bat try to, like provide both options?
Yeah. Even if you're breastfeeding and you plan to do some bottle feeding because you're going back to work and you want to do pump milk or something like that, I actually don't recommend introducing the bottle, if at all possible, until like at least the third or fourth week. The longer you can wait, the better. Baby is not going to
Okay.
have a problem. It's always going to be a little bit of but the thing that it can impact is baby's ability to latch with consistency, because access to milk, even expressed milk in a bottle, is much faster and provides instant gratification for these tiny humans. And so then they get frustrated at the breast because there's an entire letdown process that has to happen. So, if you think about breastfeeding as like a multi-course meal, right? Like appetizer, entree, and dessert, that's how breast milk is constituted. So the milk that they get at first is thinner, it's lighter in color. It's not packed with quite as many nutrients. There's still a lot of benefits, but it's more like soup, like a brothy soup, okay? And so then like they get some of that, and then the real deal starts to flow in, that's got high fat content, high caloric content, and really kind of gets into like the meat and potatoes of that experience for them. And then the hind milk is even like, that's like the best part. It's super fatty. It's incredibly dense nutritionally. And so it's like the best, like most decadent dessert that you can think of as an adult, right? Like that's the hind milk that they're getting. So when you put milk in a bottle, there's not that process, right? It's all there at the same time. So they're getting all of the benefits, which is great. But they're also getting it all at once. And so they don't have to work for it. And it can really impact the longevity and ability to breastfeed if it's introduced too soon. And that's something that you're committed to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Okay. So this is actually perfect because we're going to talk about adult nutrition as well. So you're talking about infant nutrition, and we're going to talk about feeding you guys as human beings too. Because I said sleep is number one, that's vital. Your nutrition is also vital to your healing process, regardless of what type of delivery you have. So if you have a vaginal birth or you end up having a surgical birth, your body is still going through a whole process, not the least of which is the reminder that your placenta and where it was attached in your womb is a dinner plate sized wound inside your body that you can't see, right? So if we saw somebody, right, walking around with a dinner plate sized wound on their belly exposed, we would all be horrified and like, oh my gosh, please go sit down. How can I help you? What can we do? But because we can't see it, we forget that there's like a whole thing that happened inside of our bodies. Your body will remind you by way of postpartum bleeding called lochia, which is normal and natural. It's also a great thing to keep an eye on, because if your bleeding is pretty minimal and you're doing well, and then all of a sudden you get a spike, it's letting you know that you did too much and you need to slow back down. Okay. If it stops completely and it starts again, it's also a nice little notation from your body saying, hey, I'm still not good in here. I still need some more time. But when you're thinking about this large wound inside your body that needs healing, or if you have surgical birth and you have an external incision in addition to that, we need to be gentle with our bodies, and we need to make sure that they're really well nourished from the inside so that healing can happen from the inside out, right? Also, I don't know about you, but when I'm sleep deprived and I'm tired, the last thing I want to do is cook nutritious food. I want to eat junk. That's what our bodies are designed to do. And so again, having some intention ahead of time, excuse me, this is a great place for grandmas to come in and offer support. Sometimes coworkers and neighbors are like, oh, we want to drop off a meal. Never say no. If you don't remember anything else from our conversation tonight, do not turn down food, even if it's not your favorite thing. If it's home cooked or if it's delivery, it doesn't matter. It's something you didn't have to prepare, and it's something that's still going to give nutrients to your body and allow you to keep going for one more moment. So that's a big thing. So it's on my list of things of who will cook and coordinate nourishing meals for us. There are platforms that you can utilize. If that's something that somebody was like, I really want to do this for you. They can plug people in different times, so you know who's coming, you know what to expect. You can give dietary restrictions if that's necessary and part of your journey. Any of that can go in there. It also doesn't have to be that way. You can just say, literally leave it on the porch and we're so, so grateful, right? Usually I do, if people are, thinking about bringing meals, I encourage them to use, or for you to communicate for them to use just like recyclable containers or something that you don't have to worry about getting back to them, because you want to not add to your burden in the process. You want to just be able to receive the benefit as much as possible. Also, there are great things like meal kits from places like HelloFresh or Blue Apron or Sunbasket, like just like all these different options, which is great because then it takes out the shopping piece. It's delivered to your door. Everything's there. Takes a little bit of prep, right? You still have to cook that food, but it takes out a piece and you don't have to think about it. This is also a time to utilize grocery delivery or pickup services if you haven't done that during the pandemic, where you can order your groceries and go pick them up at Meijer and you never have to step foot inside, because that means you can have a sleeping baby in the back seat and you don't have to disturb that process at all. It also means you're being gentle on your body because you're not having to walk around the store, feel stressed out about anything. It's excellent. So, okay. So then, what's also a little piece of nutrition is hydration, especially with breastfeeding moms. You're going to be thirsty all the time. Somebody's job needs to be to make sure that you always have water close at hand. It's a habit I'm still in. My baby is 9.5. Like, I always have water nearby because if I can't see it, I don't remember to drink it. Like, and I'm not sleep deprived. I just don't. I go about my day and I don't think about these things. And that's it. But you have to, because if you're dehydrated, you can't make milk for your baby. If you're not focused on nutrition, you're not going to make milk for your baby. It will become very, very difficult especially then once pumping comes into the equation. If that's something that you need to rely on, it is very, very difficult to pump milk if you're not up on your nutrition and hydration. So that's always my plug. I'm still, even my team members, my birth doulas and my postpartum doulas, every meeting that we have, I remind them to hydrate because it's just so vital to our existence. So we're going to transition on and we're going to talk a little bit about support, actually for partners, because I think that's also something that's not talked about near often enough when partners are a part of the equation. So this transition is equally as difficult for them. It's just in different ways. Their role changes, their relationship with their partner usually changes in some ways too, and that can be really hard. Also, they have not had all of these months of internal contact with this small human that's now on the outside. So their bonding is like super fresh, right? And that can be difficult. It can feel really challenging to navigate. And so I think it's really important to give some thought to people in your life that have already maybe been on this journey. In you guys' case, transitioning from one child to two, it's still a transition. The learning curve is different, but there is still a learning curve. And so if you can talk to people in your life that already have done that, it can be really, really beneficial just to know that you have somebody I can send a text to and be like, I feel like I'm really struggling. I don't know specifically what, but like, can we just talk? The answer is usually going to be yes. Nobody can say no to that, right? But you also have to ask and be willing to ask. And again, I think it's a lot easier if you've given a little bit of thought to it before, jotted down a couple of names of people, so that when you're feeling a little topsy-turvy, you can be like, oh, hey, I have that list that we talked about in that class. And you can go back to that and do a reach out. So the next part is thinking about support for other children and also pets, because sometimes it's for children that we're talking about, and sometimes it's both. It's a big transition for them too. It can be especially a big transition for pets if they've not been around a newborn before. Newborns make a lot of funny noises. They smell different and they demand a lot of attention that used to be able to be devoted to them. And so sometimes like it means having someone who says, yeah, I'll come walk your dog for you. Or sometimes it looks like a dog going to an in-law's house and staying for a couple of weeks and having their own little staycation while everybody gets settled in at home. That can be really, really beneficial too. For human kids, it's also the same. It's having people who are willing to come over and just play with that child and not be like all gushy over the baby. Like, yes, maybe a quick hello, but really they're just there for the older child or children, as the case may be. And That's so helpful because then they still feel centered and seen and important, and they it can help them bond better to their new sibling as well. So again, this is a great place for grandmas, aunts, and uncles to come in and offer support. Everybody wants to come and hold the baby, and that's fair too, but it's really important to make sure that those older humans don't feel like they're being pushed off to the side because all the attention goes onto the baby and is centered in that way instead.
Erica, I had someone share recently in another meeting about the sibling thing and just how hard it is, and how quite often you will see those, especially younger siblings, acting out and just having some challenges. And they compared it to kind of as a parent, especially when you're in the middle of those challenging times with that sibling, how would you feel if your partner brought home a new partner and like wanted you to share? I mean, and that really makes you think like, oh, if my husband just brought home this other person and said, well, they live with us now, and I'm just as into them as I am to you.
Yes.
Like we would freak out.
We would.
Like,
it's human nature, right? And
yeah.
we have full brain development happening.
Yeah.
That's on our side. We have a full vocabulary that we can pull from. We have emotional maturity in most cases, right? So like we have all this huge skill set, and then we wonder why these young humans are like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to articulate how I'm feeling. And so I'm just gonna act out, or I'm gonna, choose behaviors I never would have chosen before. Like, it's just, again, it's human design. We forget, we just forget, but that's a great comparison that it is. It's like we go from having this centered relationship with a child, and then having, like, for us, some people really worry about being able to like expand and share that love, right? But that also has to happen for the kids too. They have to go through their own expansion process, and all we can do is hold space for that to happen and make sure that we set up pillars for success in order for that to be the case. But it can be hard. And again, that is a variation of normal, and it's okay if it's hard. It will get better. Like it definitely will get better. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit about breastfeeding. So here's the thing. Nobody talks about this. I love talking about things that nobody else is willing to talk about. It's kind of my thing. So breastfeeding is a natural process. Yep. Breasts are literally designed for that purpose, right? It doesn't mean that it comes naturally. It's work. It's just work. There's this idea that it's not supposed to hurt, and that if it hurts, that something's wrong. That can be true, but that's not always the case, especially in the early days. It can be weeks where when that baby first latches, you feel like you want to climb the walls because it's really, really intense. As long as it subsides over the first few minutes of breastfeeding, everything's fine. If it continues for the whole time that you're breastfeeding, something is wrong, and you need to reach out to a lactation consultant and get support, right? I'm sure that's something that Marnie could connect with. You can reach out to me. I can connect with lactation support as well. But it's something also that I really encourage people to do before they throw in the towel. Reach out to a professional, because they have all kinds of tips and tricks, even more so than I do as a doula, to make things the best that they can be. And so there are always options. And even right now, there are virtual support options. There are virtual breastfeeding support groups, which I love. I know of a couple that I can refer people to. And again, it's great to be in conversation and community with people who are in the same trenches as you, and maybe having some of the same struggles, or who are also up at 3:30 every night. And you can start a little text chain, and y'all can reach out and have a midnight chat. It can be quite lovely. But the big takeaway is making sure that you don't shy away from reaching out to adequate supports to make sure that your breastfeeding relationship is successful, if that's something that's important to you. I also want to be super supportive of all feeding choices. Like, not everybody wants to breastfeed, and that's all right. Like, there's a lot of push and a lot of literature that really, really like elevates breastfeeding for babies. but sometimes fed is best instead of breastfed is best. Like sometimes just having a fed baby is the best option. And there can be a lot of reasons for that. It can also be a mix. Like you don't have to exclusively breastfeed, and that's okay too. Feeding can look like just so many different ways. And I think that's something else that we don't talk enough about. And so I never want a parent to feel like they, you know, are feeling their baby or they're feeling it being a parent if they need to choose a different feeding option for their family, whether it's for sanity's sake, mental health sake, you know, physical health sake, and can be a lot of different reasons. So just feed your baby and be supported in doing so. So I think it's also really important to reflect on your life before baby and the things that you want to make sure you have access to after baby comes too, right? So you keep talking about how it's a transition and it's okay that it's hard, but that hard shouldn't last forever. You also shouldn't let go of all of the things that make you you and make you feel like a whole human being just because you have a new baby, right? So for some people, part of their pillars of success is making sure that they exercise every single day, right? I see this a lot for dads. They feel like they can't because their partners may not physically be able to yet do the types of things that they were. And so they feel like they shouldn't either. But a healthy dad, especially a mentally healthy dad, is really, really awesome for a newly postpartum partner. So excuse me, if that is something that's important to your success as a human, you need to have a conversation and figure out how to make time for that. Same thing with just family time in general. Like, you know, do you want to maintain movie night every Friday night with older kids? Or, you know, is there a certain park play date that a kid really looks forward to going to? What do you need in order to be able to get that kid to that thing? Right? Even with your new baby in tow. Is that a friend who maybe rides with you? So you have extra set of hands. Cool. That's awesome. Right. Is it another new mom that you might know where you guys like go in it together? Maybe it's you decide you're going to grocery store, you're going to Target together, you know, every couple of weeks so that you have somebody else to rely on, again, mentally and physically can be really, really beneficial. So again, just giving some thought to those pieces of you that you want to make sure that you retain access to, even in the middle of the transition and the parts that feel a little bit hard and sticky. Let's see here. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything.
Just before we move off the breastfeeding topic, I had a question about the nipple shields.
Yes.
I've seen those advertised on like Facebook and things like that. And I don't know much about them. What are your thoughts or recommendations on it? Is it mostly to alleviate some of the pain like you talked about, or?
So it can, it's a more of a useful tool for a couple of situations. One, if you have a baby who's having a really hard time latching, can be really beneficial because it's more like a bottle nipple, so they can like feel it. It hits in a different spot on their palate. It can also be a useful tool for first-time breastfeeding moms because sometimes our nipples don't know how to respond to all the stimulation and what's going on, and they don't like pop out as much as they need to initially. So I like nipple shields as temporary tools. They should not be a long time fill in. If it becomes like a long time crutch, then again, that's a lactation and like a lactation counselor question. And I would recommend reaching out to somebody else. They have them at the hospital. You don't need to buy them, but you do usually have to ask for one. So if it's something you feel like you want, when you are on the mother baby unit, say, hey, do you have a nipple shield? And they'll be like, oh yeah, we've got bunches. Let me get one for you. No problem. So you don't feel like you need to buy it. And then you have it. You may or may not need it. That's the other thing. Like some moms do. I did with my first baby. I didn't need it after that. Right. So every body is different. Every experience is different. So yeah, does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So we talked a little bit about calling in supports for sleep, but also I want to talk about calling in supports so that you can nurture your relationship as a couple through your transition. So it's just so easy to let things just go. Like, to just let it go, and like we'll circle back around to this, and then circling back around actually happens like 5 years later, and you're like, wow, do I even know this person anymore? I don't know. We go to bed sometimes at the same time every night, but like, do I even know what's going on in this person's life? So again, thinking about it with intention, who can you call in so that somebody can come and hold your baby, and you guys can go hold hands and maybe just take a walk around the block together. It does not have to be big at all. It could also be somebody coming to hold your baby so that you guys can take a nap at the same time together. That can feel like a vacation in those first few weeks after having a baby. So just start thinking about it. It can also be really hard, and I want to hold space for this, to think about being separated from your baby for any length of time, or when it's like new and you're still figuring things out, and you're trying to bond, and you're feeling a little weepy because postpartum hormones and all these things, right? And also, it's just really important to do, to prioritize yourselves. We talked about that already, but also to prioritize your relationship that allowed you to be together and bring this child into the world in the first place. It's so easy to just let things slip. And then you're dealing with hormones and sleep deprivation, and you don't know how to communicate anymore because you're both tired, and just everything starts to feel weird. And so it's not that it can be avoided completely. Like, so all of those things I just listed off, I want to say those are normal experiences after you've had a baby. It's not really cause for concern or worry. But also, if there are any things that like maybe had needed to be unearthed before and nobody wanted to talk about them, they're definitely going to come up afterwards. So like, again, having intentional time and space to like check in with one another is really, really beneficial to the longevity of your relationship. So that's it. That is the end of my list. Like in the postpartum worksheet, I probably skipped over a couple of things, but these are like the big things that I feel are like just super important to having a successful and thriving fourth trimester. Like it's going to be hard, but it doesn't have to be a struggle, if that makes sense. And so that's why circling back and just having some conversations beforehand to lay a really strong foundation of expectations of how things can be, or you would hope that they could be, can just be really, really beneficial to families at any stage, whether this is your first baby, your third baby, your sixth baby, whatever. Like, it's always going to be different every time. And so, yeah, a little bit of planning can go a long way.
Erica, I have another question for you.
Yes, Dana, I love questions, by the way. They're so helpful.
Okay. I've been trying not to interrupt too much. But this is in the last topic when you were talking about support for having a plan in place and support for the couple. I like that a lot. When I was in grad school a couple of years ago, I was going to, I forget the name of it, but it was like an MSU family therapy type of a thing. And it was available to me as a student. And I went there to just kind of talk with somebody as I was dealing with working full time and, you know, kind of becoming a new parent to my stepdaughter and being in a serious relationship with my husband now, and some of the issues of we were dealing with custody and the biological mother and things like that were just really challenging at that time. And even though I was only able to go to a few of those meetings or sessions, because it was a one-on-one session that I had, I found it really, really helpful to just talk it out. And I tried to set something up moving forward with my husband and everything with the same girl, but she was a student at that time and completed her hours to, you know, fulfill what she needed to fulfill. So they wanted to switch me to somebody else, and I just didn't kind of follow through because, you know, I liked the first girl and, you know, lost track of it and so forth. But the point of all this is that I see a value in that, especially if, you know, if and when we go through the challenging times of having our baby. And, you know, maybe this is a question for you or Marnie. and if you could follow up later, if you guys have any recommendations for affordable. I mean, we both have insurance. We work for the state of Michigan and stuff, but if there's any recommendations that you guys have for that kind of family therapy style, that would even be open to having our 4-year-old come in if she has challenges with the newborn and, or jealousy or anything like that, just so that we can kind of have a plan in place and see what some of our options are. We live in Eaton Rapids, so if there's anything that you guys think of later, or if Marnie, you could send me a couple of recommendations or even a website just to look for those, I would really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Dana. Well, first of all, I have I would personally recommend that my husband and I saw for years, who's wonderful. But I can definitely send you a list too. She's an Okemos, but she's a wonderful family therapist. And I applaud you for really thinking about this. It's so important. It's so important to get ahead of it. and not let things get too far. And to Erica's point, especially, when it's a first, you do sometimes wake up 5 years later and go, who are we? Who are you? And that's not necessarily in a bad way, but if you don't take the time and make the plan to focus on how you're going to communicate with your partner, it's so easy to just, because that love is there and the respect is there and the care is there, to not talk because you don't want to rock the boat and things really aren't that bad and now's not the time. But it's always the time, right? It's always important to just make your needs known and your feelings known and hear your partners as well. So I think Dana will absolutely send you a list of some things that you can look at. And I really applaud both of you for thinking about all of this, because I certainly didn't. The whole time I'm watching this, Erica, and I'm like, oh my God. We did birthing classes privately outside of the hospital. We had a doula and no one talked to us about this 4th trimester stuff. And it would have been really helpful. Yeah.
I don't think you're not alone in that. Like, I still see it. I mean, I've been in this field for a long time and I still see it all the time that I'm like, oh, you didn't think at all about what comes after. And that's because the exciting part is, the baby showers and labor and the birth and like those first experiences. And all of that is super wonderful. And it can all come crashing down and become like this distant memory because the 4th trimester was not set up for success. And it doesn't take much. I mean, this is literally it's a 2-page PDF, like seriously, right? Like, it's a 2-page PDF. It does not have to be a lot. You don't have to like put hours and hours of thought into it, but just a little bit is all it takes to really shift things in a more positive direction. I think too, like we're talking about looking back, like 5 years into something and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I think it's important to always remember, like, this whole process, right? I talk about it as a transition, but it's also like an evolving or an evolution, right? So you're evolving and growing as a family. You're evolving and growing as individuals, as parents. I think the most important thing is to make sure that you're growing and evolving in the same direction and not apart.
Yeah.
Because I see that happen, that you're both experiencing your own things and your own processes, but they're taking you in opposite directions. It doesn't have to be that way either. Again, a little bit of, forethought and planning and being able to step into that space. But as long as you continue to do it in the same direction, even if it's like, separate paces and things like that, as long as you're still working towards the same common goal, usually like it's all okay. So, yeah.
Erica, I think about the amount of time that I spent like writing a birth plan and thinking about what this thing was going to be, what labor was going to be in my birth experience, and something that like ultimately you have very little control over. If I had spent 1/10 of that amount of time on this like postpartum plan, it would have changed everything. And at the end of the day, my birth plan did not go as planned. And I had a very large baby that was in a very weird position and a very tilted uterus and cervix. And after 30 plus hours or whatever, I had a C-section, and it was fine because I had a healthy baby and everything was great. But yeah, this is just such a great topic. You got me all fired up, Erica.
I love yeah. No, birth planning is important too, right? Like I work with birth plans all the time. It's super important. And mostly not so much about the plan. It's about knowing what you want and what you hope for, right? And having contingencies for that. Like, so that's not our topic tonight, but we got a couple minutes. So I'm gonna spin on that for too, because it's important. Because my goal in birth planning is to make sure that you've thought about all the possibilities, like the what ifs, and that when you're experiencing your birth, if all those what ifs come true, that you get to the other side and you're like, dang, that was nothing like what I thought was going to happen or what I had planned for, and I still feel okay about it. That's the most important part. It's not so much about all of those little details and all of the perfection and having the perfect birth that you wanted. Like that can be great. I've been at those births. But more often than not, like the one thing that we know about birth is that it's unpredictable. Like, that's the predictable part of birth, is that it's unpredictable. And so the best laid plans go out the window the moment that you walk in the door. Like that's just kind of how it goes. So if you walk in with that mindset that like, I have some things that I would really love if they happen, and I'm also okay if they don't, like that's usually a great place to be. So then you can put, you know, that little bit of energy into planning for your postpartum. Because here's the other thing, I didn't mention this tonight. Postpartum, that's forever, right? Labor and birth is very temporary. Pregnancy, that's temporary. It does come to an end. Your labor, your birth, that comes to an end. It has an actual endpoint. Postpartum is literally forever. You are always in your postpartum period as long as you have a child. Plain and simple. So when you acquire skills little by little in starting to plan now for your postpartum period and that fourth trimester, that first 12 weeks after, that becomes, you know, the next 3 months after that. And then you're at 9 months, and then you've made it to the first year. Yay, cause for huge celebration. First birthdays, everybody gets so excited about throwing a first birthday party. And I celebrate parents, like, because babies don't remember it. 1-year-olds don't remember their first birthday, but parents remember almost everything that they just went through in the last year, because it's hard, but they're still here and they made it, and they deserve cake. Like they deserve way more than cake, but they definitely deserve cake at that first birthday. But it always continues to grow and evolve, right? Like the skills that you start to hone in this period right now of planning for your postpartum period, those transfer with you into toddlerhood, that preschool age, which can be really, really tricky, and then school age stuff. And then they become teenagers, and oh my gosh, hold on to your hats. Like, you know, it's like there's always, but like you go back to these roots of things that you can plant right now for yourself, that can just continue to like be a gift that gives to you over and over again. Cause you're like, oh, I practiced that a long time ago. Like, this feels a little out of sync. Maybe I need to sit down and make a plan for a second. Maybe we need to have a conversation, do some proactive instead of reactive parenting. It can go a long ways, but it starts right now in planning for what is about to come. So yeah.
Erica, I really liked what you said about the birth plan, and that's your plan for what you hope it to be. And that's what your postpartum, that's what your fourth trimester plan should be too. So we put all this thought into what we hope this one experience is, and we forget to put all this thought into what do we hope that first 3 months at home with new baby looks like? What do we want out of that? What are our hopes and and dreams for this incredibly amazing, special new time? So what a wonderful thing to start thinking about. Like, how cool.
I love it. I really do. So yes, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity tonight, Marnie.
Oh, Erica, thank you.
It's really fun to be able to share. And I'll make sure that you have the PDF that you can share with folks.
Yep.
You can add that into your tools and keep it forever. And then I'll also make sure that you have contact information for me, so that if people have questions, they want to reach out and have a more in-depth conversation, I'm available for that too. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica. And thank you, Dana, for coming. And I'm sorry I didn't catch your husband's name, but thank you both.
No, thank you, you guys. I know it probably would have been better to have more people.
No, it's awesome this
but
way,
for
because
me-
then you get all the attention. We don't care.
like, I'm thinking, how can I schedule this with you two again? This was great to have just questions, and this is really my first, I've done the dive into Pinterest of, all of the things of the bag you're supposed to prepare for the hospital, and the idea of a birth plan, which I haven't made. My plan is make it to the hospital and ask for an epidural, and which is funny because I have a graduate degree in planning, but this was really great for me to think about this kind of idea of the fourth trimester and visualizing what I want it to look like, and kind of planning ahead for some of the things we talked about, like sleep schedules and pre-made meals and family time and support for the partners and involved, and what all that looks like, instead of trying to figure it out while that's going on. Because I think, like you were saying at the end, Marnie, just now, about being really excited and Erica kind of motivating you and everything like that is definitely how I feel as well, because I think that it really gives me a perspective of what to look for in a positive light, which is kind of how Erica started. So I think that this was great. I think it's even better that it was kind of tailored for me and my questions, I feel like, but I really appreciate you guys putting this together and kind of following through, even though I was the only one that called in, and I just really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Dana. It was our pleasure. And I will follow up with you with that PDF from Erica. And also next week, right? Next week, Erica, we're doing the no one told me this. So kind of what happens after you give birth. So, and if you can't make it to that one live, Dana, that will also be recorded too. And I'm definitely going to be touching base with you and seeing what kind of supports I can offer up. Because I love meeting new families in Eaton County. And
yeah, I have questions for both of you that, so I'll be following up as well.
awesome.
Will you be sending out another Zoom link or invite registration, I should say, for that?
Yep, I'll follow up with you in the morning with that, Dana, and make sure you're on our email list and all of that good stuff. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, just thank you again for coming, and I'm so excited for you guys. What an exciting time in your lives.
It is. When are you actually due, Dana? We didn't even talk about that.
August 13th.
Fantastic.
Coming up.
Right now. It is coming up. So
yeah.
Have an excellent rest of your pregnancy and a fantabulous birth. It's a good time. It's a really good time. So enjoy it as much as possible.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, you too, Marnie.
Bye.
Bye.